He didn't know the boy's name, only Thath was screaming for help. What he did next made the world pause. If you've ever wondered if a single act of courage can change your entire life, this one's for you. May your days sparkle with peace, your worries melt away, and your dearest dreams rise within reach. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching this from? You're not just subscribers, your family. It was on those nights when the sky couldn't decide whether to storm or cry. Rain fell sideways across the rusted rooftops of South Glen. A neighborhood smelled of old motor oil and broken promises. Mason Cole, a single dad with grease-stained hands and a backpack full of past-due notices, was walking his daughter Ava home from her after-school shift at the diner. They were arguing a gobo math homework when Mason froze mid-step, a scream the kind that cut straight through bone. Flames licked thissids of a worn-out trailer across the street. The windows pulsed orange and smoke curled like angry fingers through a roof. Without thinking, Mason shoved his daughter behind him and bolted across the muddy road. The rain was coming harder now, but it couldn't touch fire roaring from within. He kicked the door locked. No time, grabbing a tire iron from an old truck. Bed hesmished the nearest window, sliced his forearm open in the process, and hoisted himself inside. Inside, it was chaos. Hot, choking chaos. He dropped to the floor and crawled forward, calling out through the smoke. Then, a cough, a child's scowl. He turned toward it, heart hammering, until his hand found something small, shaking. A boy, made 5 or 6, curled up in the corner with a bandana tied around his wrist. "He got you, buddy." "Hold on," Mason gasped, wrapping the child in his flannel shirt. Then the roof creaked, and the world went black. When Mason opened his eyes, all could see was gray. For a second, he thought he was dead until pain surged through his ribs like fire. He coughed and suddenly someone was shouting, his breathing. "He's alive." Paramedics wormed the wrecked trailer's edge, carefully lifting Mason out as heckeralled the boy against his chest. That child had passed out. Suits stirred a Crocious face like war paint as they pulled them both into the ambulance. Ava ran toward her father, sobbing, "Dad. Oh my God, Dad." But before Mason could sign a thing, engines thundered down Thestry. Not sirens, Harleys 1, then 5, then a dozen more. Black leather beards, ink. The kind of arrival that made everyone tense up. The EMTs paused. A firefighter muttered, "Ah, hell." Thelid biker jumped off his motorcycle, tossed his helmet aside, and sprinted toward the ambulance. His vest read, AFA Hells Angels MC, but it was the way Head dropped to his knees beside the boy that made everyone step back. "That's my sin," he whispered. The paramedic hissed. "His name's River. Please just tell me he's alive," the biker said, his voice breaking. Mason looked up from the stretcher, eyes glassy, nodding. "But get him oxygen fast." Thebeker turned. To Mason, this man covered in ash, shirt torn, eyes burning, their gazes locked. And in that moment, something shifted in the air. Now, not a thank you, not yet, just a silent understanding. The kind forged in fire. 2 days later, Mason sat quietly in his hospital bed, bruised and bandaged, trying to unwrap a peanut butter sandwich. With one hand, his phone buzzed with reporters. A news van parked outside the ER. Someone had uploaded a blurry video of the rescue. They weren't calling him the hero of South Glen, but Mason didn't feel like one. Heroes didn't lose their jobs for missing Ganatha. Shift. Heroes didn't have bill stacks so high, they used them to block out the cold. Ava brought him a coffee and sat beside him, resting her head on his good shoulder. "You saved that boy, Dad." "Doesn't matter what they say. Hesmald, tired. I didn't even think. He just ran."
Ow.
That's when the door opened. The same man from the fire walked in, flanked by 2 bikers. His leather cut still said AFA, but today his eyes weren't wild. They were weighed down. He removed hissing glasses and stepped closer. "My name's Hawk," he said, extending a hand. "Rivers, my son. Doctors say he'll be okay." Because of you. Mason shook Hishand, the grip firm, full of something unspoken. But before he could answer, Hawk pulled out something wrapped in cloth. It wasn't money. It was a silver pin. Simple. Evie, you don't know us, but you should know this, Hawk said quietly. When someone saves one of ours, they don't stand alone anymore. Mason blinked. I don't follow. You will, Hawk said, then turned and left. Ava whispered. What was that? Mason stared at the pin in his hand. An angel winged, just 3 letters. Ayefa. Mason didn't see them again for weeks. Life went back to normal, or as normal as it could get after you'd become a viral clip on 6 news channels. He returned at tow. The garage where he worked part-time, only to be told he was a liability now. Too famous. Too many distractions. Having a shift cleaning buses at night. Quiet, cold work, perfect for a man trying not to think too much. Then one night, after dropping off Ava at school, he found a package on his porch. Nay, not, just a leather vest inside, weren't but clean. A small patch on the back read prospect. Tucked inside the vest pocket was a photograph. River smiling with the thumbs. Up and a caption scribbled in marker. Still asks about you. Mason sat on the steps for a long time staring at the vest. Was this a joke? A thank you? Or something more? The next morning a Harley rumbled up his driveway. Hawk stepped off alone this time. We don't hand those out lightly, he said. Mason folded his arms. I'm not a biker. I'm just a dad who couldn't walk away. Exactly why we came, Hawk said. AFA is not just about chrome androids. It's about honor, loyalty, and repaying the unpayable. Mason hesitated. I'm not looking for a reward, Hawk nodded. Good, we're not offering one, then he added quietly. But we've got room for one more at the table. Mason looked down at the vest again. Something deep in his chest stirred. Something that hadn't moved in years. 3 weeks later, Mason stood inside a warehouse. It smelled like gasoline, leather, and burnt coffee. A dozen men, some with eye patches. Others with lined faces and tattoos that told stories without words, sat around a makeshift table made off salvaged car doors. They called E-Church, but there were no pews, nor ebs, just loyalty and silence. Hawk motioned for Mason to step forward. Therum fell still. Rivera was there too, holding a tiny version of a biker vest, smiling like it was Christmas. Mason cleared his throat. I'm not sure why I'm her. An older biker with a white beard said, You're here 'cause. When the moment came, you didn't wait. You burned your own skin to save a kid you didn't know. That ain't nothing. It's brotherhood. Hawk placed a hand on Mason's shoulder. You don't have to ride. You don't even have to wear that vest. But know this, if you ever need. Us, we come. Not for Mooney, not for glory, just because the hour one of us now. Mason looked around the room, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. He felt chosen. Mason didn't own a motorcycle. The closest he came to a Harley wash hanging the oil on one a few years back, a buddy's shop. When Hawk showed up. The next morning, with a second bike, matte black, low seat, heavy engine, Mason blinked in disbelief. This isn't mean, he said, still holding a lunchbox in his hand, dressed for his janitor shift. It is now, Hawk replied, tossing him a key ring. With a silver angle wing attached. Mason looked down at the key, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or run. I don't even know how torrid. We'll teach you, Hawk said. Brotherhood ain't about perfection. It's about effort. Ava stepped out of the house, backpack slung over one shoulder. Her eyes widened at the sight of the bike, and then her gaze landed on her father. You're riding with them now? She asked, more curious than scared. Mason hesitated. I don't know what I'm doing, but maybe it's time I learned something new. That weekend, they took him to an abandoned airstrip on the edge of town. The other bikers lined up, watching in silence as Hawk coached Mason through the basics. The first few minutes were rough, stalled, head ebbed, but the moment he made it down stretch without falling, the roar off cheers echoed across the strip. It wasn't about the ride. It was a boot proving he could start again. It settled into a strange rhythm after that. Mason kept his night job at Thebes Depot, but started showing up Tasmal meets with the crew. So new messages for coffee and card games. Other times to help rebuild bikes for kids in foster homes, one of the Angles' lesser-known traditions. Ava grew. Closato River, the two of them forming a non-likely friendship of shared trauma and silly dares. But one night, the phone rang. Hawk's number lit up the screen. Mason answered. There was no small talk. Hawk's down. Mason froze. What happened? Truck ran a red light. It was a Scortinga toy run for the kids. Mason's heart dropped, grabbed his jacket, and left without a word. When he arrived at the hospital, the parking lot looked like a movie scene. Dozens of bikes lined up, engines off, helmets sitting silently on seats. Inside the waiting room was full-off leather-clad men and women, heads bowed. Riva sat in the corner, gripping a stuffed toy Mason had given him, Avasted by his side. Mason walked up, knelt beside the boy. Is he going to be okay? River asked. Mason didn't know, but he did what Hawk once did for him. He placed a steady hand on the kid's shoulder. You're not alone, River. We're right here. 2 days passed. With no word. Hawk was still in surgery, hooked up to machines that breathed for him. Spread. Some said he wouldn't make it. Others swore he woke up asking for River. But none of that mattered to Mason. He just kept showing up. The hospital staff watched him curiously. Most visitors came and went. But Mason, he mopped the halls, brought coffee to nurses, even fixed a busted light in the ICU corridor. Can't sit still, he'd say, but the truth was, Hickle didn't bear to wait. One night, a younger biker named Torka Proshadim in the cafeteria. You know, man, you didn't have to do all this. Mason shrugged. Feels better than doing anything. Tork sat beside him. We've had prospects. Flake. Guys who wore the patch for a week and bailed. Help, but you're not even officially in. Andy are the only one here every day. Mason looked up. Not trying to prevent a thing. Tork smiled. Exactly why you already did. Later that night, Mason peeked into Hawk's room again. McCann's beeped steadily. River had fallen asleep in a chair, wrapped in his Dataverse-sized jacket. K. Mason quietly pulled a blanket over the boy and dimmed the lights. What they didn't show on the news was this. The loyalty, the quiet acts, the way brotherhood wasn't loud, it was in the waiting. The day Hawk woke up, the entire hospital floor felt it. Not because alarms blared, but because alarms finally broke. Mason had just stepped out to grab coffee. When then Ars ran past, he dropped everything and rushed back in. Inside the room, River clung to his father's arm, tears streaming down his cheeks. Hawk's voice was weak, growly, but clear. Is the boy okay? Mason blinked. You're asking about me? No, Hawk rasped. River, you then, he added slower. Did you keep your vest clean? It was a joke, but only someone who understood the coda could make. Everyone in the room exhaled at once, even the bikers. Tork wiped his eyes without shame. That night, after Hawk was stable, the crew gathered in the hospital parking lot. Ingenious stayed, silent, just one flashlight in the center of the circle. Mason Wass called forward. One by one, each brother stepped up and placed a hand on his shoulder. No ceremony, no speeches, just Hawk's voice from the hospital window, weak but loud enough. Then someone stepped forward, Fielder with the white beard, and stitched full insignia onto Mason's vest by hand. From prospect to brother, wearing full patch changed things. Mason didn't ride just as a guest now. He was part of every ride. Every decision, every meeting that came with weight, not all of it was clean. One cold evening, Hawk called him aside. There's something I need to ask. Mason listened. There's a boy in lockup. Hawk said 17 says he's in deep. No family. He retched out to us, wants help getting out. But this kid's not safe where he is. Mason frowned. What are you asking? Just visit them, Hawk said. You're good with words. You've lived pain. He might listen to you. The next morning, Mason sat in front of a thick pane of glass in Theckan jail, staring at a boy with bruised knuckles and a chipped tooth. They talked slowly. Mason didn't preach. He just shared about fire, fear, and second chances. When the kid started crying, Mason knew this wasn't about being a biker anymore. It was about being the man he'd needed when he was younger. The patch didn't change him, it reminded him who he'd always been. Mason hadn't thought about his own father in years. But after that visit to the jail, memories returned like ghosts. His father wasn't a bad man, just broken. Alcohol layoffs, fists on walls. There were no apologies. Only silence and bills that piled higher than the fridge. One night after locking up the bus depot, Mason walked along the same street he once ran from as a kid. Heppus, the corner store where his date is to cash in bottles. For gas money, the building was boarded up now, forgotten like most of this part off town. He sat on the curb, lit a cigarette he didn't finish, and stared at the night sky. Eck found him there. "You ever think about who you used, Tobe?" Mason asked. "Without looking up?" "All the time," Hawk said. "But not 'cause him is him," Mason nodded. "Just trying not to become him." Hawk sat beside him, knees cracking. "We all carry fire, brother. Some of us burn with it. Some of us learn how to warm others." For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Mason whispered, "Do you think I could be more Ethan?" This Hawk smiled. "You already are." The next storm came hard, just like the first. Thunder cracked through the night sky, and rain swept across Thestritz, with no regard for who had shelter and who didn't. Out. Mason was driving Ava home from school. When they saw it, a woman hunched beneath a flickering street lamp, clutching 2 trash bags, and a child soaked to Theban. No jacket. Mason slowed the truck. Ava said nothing. She just looked at hurted. They pulled over. "Need a ride?" Mason asked, rolling down the window. The woman hesitated, then nodded. Climbed in. She said her name was Rita. Her son's name was Elijah. They just left a shelter that had no more beds. Back at their place, Mason handed her a towel. Ava heated soup. The Small apartment felt warmer that night, not because of the heater, but because it was shared. Before Rita left the next day, she pulled Mason aside. "No one stops anymore," she said. "Not like that." He smiled gently. "I used to think inness was a luxury. Now I know it's a choice." Later that week, River asked why they helped strangers. "'Cause Summian helped me once," Mason replied. "And I made a promise I'd never forget that." The sirens came just after midnight. Mason and Ava woke to the smell of smoke. But this time it wasn't their own home. 2 streets over, a laundromat was burning fast. Mason didn't hesitate. He grabbed his boots, then paused. Ava stood in the hallway holding his old flannel shirt. "I know," she said softly. "Just come back again, okay?" Heck kissed her forehead, always by the time reached the scene. Firefighters were blocking the perimeter, but people were shouting. Someone was inside. Mason didn't think. He moved like instinct through smoke, through heat, past voice telling him to stop. Inside, he found an old man trapped behind a folding station. Unable to move, Mason lifted him, coughing through the smoke, and kicked the back door open just as the ceiling collapsed. This time, Thecomeras were already there. But Mason didn't wait for interviews. He just sat in the curb, covered in ash, and whispered. To himself, still breathing, the old man clutched his hand and didn't let go. Some flames you walk into, others you're built to carry. The next club meeting felt different. The table was full, but one chair remained empty. It was Hawk's. He hadn't returned fully since the accident. Recovery was slow, and the doctors warned of anathor surgery. Still, every man in the room left that chair untouched. When Mason walked in, wearing his full patch, allies turned to him. Torque stood. "Brother, the chair's yours." Hawk left word. Mason shook his head. "That's Hisplis." But an older angel wolf, quiet and feared, stood next. He said leadership ain't about being loud, it's about being there. "And you've been there." Reluctantly, Mason sat. The glance that followed wasn't awkward. It was respect, solid and unspoken. Then Torque passed him a worn notebook. Hawk's. Notes, club files, charity rides, foster lists, it's all here. He trusts you with it. Mason opened the book. His name was scribbled on the top page, not as a backup but as a brother. and for the first time, Mason didn't feel like Simeon, who just filled the space. He felt like someone was shaping it. Ava was cleaning out her closet when she found it. Mason's old prospect vest. She held it up, dusty and wrinkled like Amory, that still breathed. She brought it to him. "What do you want to do with this?" He looked at it for a long moment. "Let's keep it," he said. "Reminds me who used to be and who I chose to become." That evening, they framed the vest and hung it in the hallway, just beneath a photo of Mason, Rivera, and Hawk taken after Hawk's return from surgery. In the picture, all three wore full patches. All three smiled like they'd seen Helen chose to keep walking anyway. Visitors often paused at the vest. Why frame something so worn? One escadance. Ava answered before Mason could becos. That's the one he bled in. Theon that marked the beginning. Spring came late that year, painting South Glen in fragile colors, budding leaves, cracked sidewalks washed clean by rain. Mason had become something of a local legend, but he never let it show. Fixed heaters for neighbors still dropped Ava off at school with a thermosoft chai. Outs. And still refused money from Anyun, who offered. One Saturday morning, Hawk invited him to ride out with the Angels. Not to a bar, but to a shelter outside town. "Kids there called us a little noise," Hawk said. The shelter was tucked behind a church, forgotten by most, but not by Thengels. The bikes roared into Thelit. Children ran to the windows, wide-eyed and amazed. The bikers set up toodles of toys, books, and food. River helped pass out candy. Torque gave rides in circles. Wolf showed a kid how to change a tire using bolts and comm hands. Mason found himself sitting with a teenager who wouldn't speak, just stared at the patch on his chest. "You didn't look like the guys on TV," the boy muttered. "Good," Mason smiled. 2. He took off his jacket and placed it around the kid's shoulders. Sometimes the road back starts with just feeling warm again. The boy didn't answer, but he didn't take the jacket off either. One night, as Mason was locking the garage after working late, he found Hawk leaning against the doorframe. "You ever think about something more permanent?" Hawk asked. Mason razzed. "Eyebrow, like what? A bigger vest?" Hawk chuckled. Nah, I mean leadership. A place up front." Mason's face changed. "You want me to run the chapter?" Hawk nodded. "Not tomorrow, but soon. You forget what it takes. Steady hands, right heart." Mason leaned back, staring at the oil-stained ceiling. "I was just a single dad cleaning floors a year ago." "Exactly," Hawk said. "You earned your place without asking for it. People listen to yo because you've been where they are. Yo bedeled for a boy you didn't know. Yo baited at my bed when even I didn't think I'd make it." Mason stayed quiet. "You've already been leading," Hawk added. "This would just make it official." Later that night, Mason sat at AA's bedside while she slept, brushing a hand across her forehead. He whispered, "I don't know if I'm ready." But deep down, he knew he'd been ready the moment head jumped through that fire. It was a warm Sunday afternoon. Ava and River sat on the porch, giggling over a broken toy motorcycle they were trying to fix with duct tape. Mason watched from their stairs, half reading a worn book. When Ava suddenly looked up and asked, "Dad, are you happy?" The question caught him off guard. "Why do you ask? Why do you ask?" She shrugged. "Just you do a lot for people, for them, but I never hear you say it." Mason thought for a moment. The past few months had been a storm of identity, loyalty, and choices. He remembered nights sleeping in that truck, wondering if he'd ever be enough for Ava, the fire, the boy, the brotherhood. It all swirled in one long chain of moments that burned and healed at the same time. "I think he said slowly, happiness is in fireworks quiet like watching you laugh on a porch you never thought we'd have." Ava smiled. "Soya," Mason nodded. "Yeah, I'm happy then," he added. "And you're the reason I didn't burn out a long time ago." The chapter hosted their first open RIT that spring. A family event, food, music, stories. The mayor even showed up, though he avoided eye contact with most of the Angels. But Mason, he met a speech. Standing on the back of a flatbed truck, vest fitted snug, helped out at the crowd. Bikers, kids, local strangers. He cleared his throat. I used to think family was something you were born into, but I've learned it's also something you build. And some a tennis fire doesn't destroy. Sometimes it forges. He held up a small patch. On it, a flame wrapped around an angel's wing. For anyone who's walked through fire and came out choosing kindness. This is for you. He knelt down, pinning it to Rivers. Small vest first, then to a Vastanim jacket. People clapped. Some cried. That night after the crowd left and the lot emptied. Mason sat on his bike alone, watching the stars, not touches anything. But to thank them. Years passed. Ava graduated with River cheering, louder than anyone. Mason eventually took over the chapter, not with a roar. But with quiet consistency, he kept the mission clean. Outreach rides, second chances, work with shelters and jails. He never became rich, but his name was spoken with respect, not just by bikers, but bite hosts who didn't even ride. One evening, he took a solo ride up the ridge where Eth fire had happened. The lot was Ganino, just tall grass and silence. Stood for a while and whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, but maybe to the boy he used said to be the one who was scared, broke, and alone, who chose to run toward fire anyway. Ava's voice rang through his memory. "Are you happy?" And with the hum off, his engine behind him, the wind brushing past his jacket, heavy with patches earned. He smiled to himself. Yeah, he was. And he wasn't riding. Alone and more. The story made your chest tighten, your heart swell, or your eyes blur for even a second. You know what to do? Drop a comment below. What would you do if the fire came? Subscribe for more real life transformations, second chances, and stories that stay with you long after the last.